From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips. Our guest for this broadcast is Joseph Becker, the Legislative Director for Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. Do you prefer Joe or Joseph?
Joe is great.
Joe, one of the reasons I'm happy you're here is that all over America, people admire Ron Paul for his fidelity to the Constitution, for his leadership on issues that would otherwise be mishandled. And I'm sure people are curious about how Ron's constitutional principles get translated into a legislative agenda. What does a legislative director do? What's your function on the staff?
Well, my function is to try and listen to Ron's priorities and generate, with the help of council legislation that technically will do what it is that Ron is trying to do. Additionally, for example, in the 105th Congress, we had something like 6,000 pieces of legislation introduced, and my job is to evaluate that to see if it's worthy of Ron's co-sponsorship, which of course little of it is.
Why did Ron pick you? He had to have a great deal of respect for your discernment and your wisdom to, in effect, be the guard at the entryway in considering these pieces of legislation.
Well, I think Ron and I have known one another for about 10 years, and I guess we share an intellectual hero, a gentleman named Murray Rothbard, who's no longer with us. He
was your professor at the University of Nevada at Las Vegas.
That's correct. He was probably the most sound free market economist of the century, and I sought him out, and it turns out he was also one of Ron's intellectual heroes. So we had a lot to talk about, and when Murray unfortunately passed away a number of years ago, Ron told me that he was seriously considering re-entering Congress. I was finishing law school at the time and said, if I can help you, let me know. And as it turns out, he got elected and gave me a call, and here I am.
I remember I was at Murray Rothbard's memorial service in New York City shortly after he died, and I share your very high regard for the leadership he provided. His book, The Mystery of Banking, is one of the most informative pieces I've ever read on understanding how our system works, and some of the works which he did on early American history provide insights that the mainstream history books tend to overlook. So do you work solo in evaluating those 6,000 bills, or do you have help?
Fortunately, I don't. I not only have help, I have very good help. We have a couple of legislative assistants. Ron's on two committees. He's on House Banking. He's on Education and the Workforce. So I do have a legislative assistant that handles each of those committee assignments. There's virtually no one in the office that doesn't play some role in trying to follow at least some of the legislation that they have personal interest in. So everyone, it seems, gets some issue to kind of watch, and then I work with them and try and funnel to Ron the information. I mean, it's when I first came to Washington to work for Ron, I thought this will be good. I'll be able to tell him, the things that he needs. I'll be able to give him direction, and of course, quite the opposite is true. It's most important just that I get accurate information to Ron, and then he really knows quite well how to evolve it and what to do with it. So,
do you have staff meetings in the office, or is it basically one-on-one contact?
We don't have. We're so much the minority in Congress. I mean, virtually no one else talks to us about issues the extent, or at least the way we like to talk to one another about them. I mean, we obviously try and make people aware of our view on things. That's part of our mission, we think. But no, we don't need staff meetings because we're constantly in contact with one another.
Now, Ron has gone out front on several pieces of legislation where he's taking the initiative. What are the top 4 or 5 bills that Ron has drafted with your help and is working on in the Congress?
Well, obviously withdrawing from the UN is a very big thing, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger thing as treaties start to undermine more and more of what the Constitution is supposed to guarantee individual citizens in this country. That's a very serious thing. One of his major issues for this Congress is the idea of privacy. We had the Know Your Customer rules that were generated by...
Let me just interject and say that Ron did a heroic job in battling the FDIC and the other federal agencies that were, in effect, going to make bank customers criminal suspects. And there was so much opposition generated by Ron and others that they had to withdraw the proposed regulations.
Yeah, I do think that if people really knew what was, much of what was going on in those 6,000 pieces of legislation, there would be a lot more outcry. But fortunately, Ron and some people who picked up the ball and spread the word created a huge mess down at the FDIC, which of course is perfectly fine.
The FDIC is the Federal Deposit Insurance Commission, which promulgated rules calling upon member banks to look for certain characteristics which might indicate criminal activity or suspicious activity. And it went totally against the limits on federal power and the jurisprudential rights of the American people over centuries.
Yeah, it's actually even slightly worse than you describe it. You're being quite kind.
I always understate things.
It was not only the FDIC, but the Federal Reserve and a couple of other banking-related agencies. But it's more than just looking for suspicious activity. These banks are already somewhat required to do that already. This is maintaining a profile on every single customer that a bank has, and if the deposits increase or the withdrawals increase or either of them decrease, or it was almost like
they're out of the pattern.
Right, anything out of the pattern, and everyone's monitored. This generates a report to agencies like the FBI, the IRS, the DEA. It's very nasty stuff.
There was a time in America where the government was understood to be the servant of the people rather than vice versa. It's changed mightily. Ron, in a previous period when he was in Congress before his temporary departure, was the leading critic of the Monetary Reform Act of 1980, which was one of the most insidious power-grabbing proposals ever enacted. I can't believe that any members of Congress read it before they voted on it. It basically stuck the American taxpayer with the debts of other countries, did many other things.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve Act, if that's what you're speaking of course, was one of these last minute, just about to adjourn before the Christmas holiday, if memory serves. I've been to...
Of course, that was prior. This one came up in 1980, and Ron, even then as a member of the Banking Committee, did a tremendous job of warning what would happen, and his predictions came true. But the Federal Reserve Act itself is totally unconstitutional. It gives the Fed more power over the economy than Congress has, than the private sector has. They're able to influence inflation rates, interest rates, and it has a foreign policy effect, too, in terms of reserve funds and the role of the dollar around the world.
Yeah, certainly Dr. Rothbard was an outspoken critic. Ron's very good on this. We have introduced a piece of legislation this Congress to repeal the Federal Reserve Act and all of the evil that comes with that.
Talk about that a little bit and share with us some of the things that Rothbard had to say about it and that concern you and Ron.
Well, Murray wrote, conventional history or wisdom, as you spoke of earlier, suggests that the reason we needed a Federal Reserve was to preserve financial stability. Here in this country, of course, the Great Depression happened, not so long after the Federal Reserve got its money-making machine working. So, I mean, this is
massive
sort of
inflation. The Fed has operated in such a manner as to vastly increase the wealth of the political establishment and to do it without having actual votes in Congress to raise taxes. Through inflation, they have raised taxes. My wife and I bought a car in 1965 for less than $2,000. The same car today would cost us $16,000 or $17,000, not because it's a better car, but because the dollar is worth less.
Yeah, most likely it could even be worse in some respects.
That's right.
Yeah, the gold, getting off the gold standard is a major problem. I mean, it's of course, governments for a long, long time have done what's called coin clipping, where you call in all the money and then reissue it with less real gold in it. It's much easier to do when you're just printing, paper that has no inherent value. So, certainly that's an issue that, that's an issue that Ron still feels very strongly about. And, sometimes Ron is looked at as kind of a maverick, but or they question his Republican standing. But I took a look at the Texas Republican Party platform, and strangely enough, or brilliantly enough, it does include abolishing the Fed and returning to a gold standard.
Well, as Bob Dole proved, Republican platforms don't count for very much. But I'm glad that Ron is true to the most important platform, which is politically, which is the Constitution of the United States. How do we have less than a minute before our break? How do counterparts in other congressional offices react to you and to Ron as you seek their support?
It varies. Almost. I mean, I would say Ron is the most, certainly the most principled member of Congress, but it's unfair to say that various other offices don't have principle as well. It's just the principle prominent on the Hill seems to be let's get reelected.
One thing I've noticed is that people are taking Ron much more seriously in this session of Congress than ever before, because what he says makes eminent good sense. Hold that thought. We'll be back right after these messages. My guest is Joe Becker, Legislative Director for Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. Please stay with us. Hi, I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus. I'm inviting you to learn more about the Conservative Caucus, a grassroots public policy action organization that was founded in 1974. Whether you're opposed to socialized medicine, interested in making Congress more accountable, stopping the New World Order, fighting gun control, reducing taxes, or restoring America to its biblical premises and constitutional boundaries, we're the organization you're looking for. Please call the number on your screen to get more information about our work.
For more information, write the Conservative Caucus, 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180, or call 703-938-9626. Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper, and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips. Our guest is Joe Becker, Legislative Director for the Honorable Ron Paul, Congressman from Texas. Ron, quite predictably, is in the forefront of opposition to the unconstitutional war in Kosovo. I was glad to see that he's a co-plaintiff in Congressman Tom Campbell's lawsuit. Talk to me a little bit about this and the constitutional issues that are involved in developing Ron's position.
Yeah, we almost have to back up to, we'd have to back up quite a ways, because we haven't fought a constitutional war in Ron's view since, World War II, where we actually declared war. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, I believe it's Clause 11, suggests that, or I shouldn't say suggests, it says that only Congress can declare war, and then once the war is properly declared by the House and Senate, then the President is responsible for waging it. Getting away from that simple procedure has really created a huge mess. What you in essence have is what I would call role reversal now, and no one really seems to know quite who's supposed to do what. On February 9th, Ron introduced, I believe it was H.R. 647, with thousands of bills. I sometimes forget the number, but this one I think is correct, which prohibited the use of Department of Defense appropriated funds for activity and military activity in Kosovo. That bill got 25 co-sponsors almost immediately and then was promptly ignored by the relevant committee of jurisdiction.
Which was international relations?
I believe international relations, and it may be the national security, right? But in any case, I think we were the first ones to come forward with this, and this is not unusual. We did the same thing with the Iraq War, trying to prevent an offensive attack. So what you have is no declaration of war, but the executive branch goes forward and begins military
I would argue that even if there were a declaration of war, it would still be unconstitutional, because when you're calling up forces, the original intent of the framers was that you can do it for defensive purposes, to repel foreign invasion, to suppress domestic insurrection, to otherwise uphold the Constitution. You can also arguably use military force to project power in defense of the country. But in the case of the Balkans, there is no national security interest of the United States of America which is consistent with what the Constitution contemplates. So the tragedy is that Bill Clinton has been able to get away with this, and I'm just thankful that Ron and other members of Congress may lay down some markers in the courts that will restrain future usurpations of power.
Yeah, your points are certainly well taken. We don't even need to get to the merits of whether we should have. I mean, the way we would evaluate things is, first, is it constitutional, and then is it prudent? It fails at least one test of constitutionality, and that's quite enough. And as a consequence of this, what has happened is the middle of last week we had 4 votes on the House floor, which now you've got the president who's, in essence, declared war and is trying to fight it, and so Congress seems to be retaliating by trying to do what's now the president's job. We had 4 votes on the House floor, 2 of them thanks to Mr. Campbell. One of them was to prohibit funding for ground troops. Well, that passed overwhelmingly. But that would, in essence, was the same thing that Ron introduced. In addition to that, we had a bill to declare war, and I think that got 2 votes out of 435. So obviously we're not declaring war. We had a bill that said we didn't support, or we did support, what's going on over there currently. That also did not pass.
It failed 213 and 213.
And then, as if all of that weren't enough, then we had a vote that said we should bring the troops home, which, if you're not going to declare war and you're not going to do what you're currently doing, this would seem like this would
logical.
Pass overwhelmingly. But this, of course, gets defeated almost as badly as some of the others had passed. So all of this then makes no sense. So Mr. Campbell and 16 co-plaintiffs said to the court, listen, we've got no declaration of war. We aren't even acting according to the War Powers Resolution, which is probably unconstitutional in itself. At least every president since Nixon has said so. So they filed suit and said the president is acting unconstitutionally. It'll be interesting to see if that happens. The newest episode, though, is that a congressional delegation went to the area over the last several days, and they now think they've worked out some sort of a peace accord. But this, of course, is the job of the executive branch, if anyone is to do these sorts of treaties.
Well, either the executive branch or Jesse Jackson.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he at least didn't pretend to be acting, for the U.S. government. As far as I know, I could be mistaken on that. But
well,
here we have,
Bill Clinton gave him precedence over the congressional delegation.
So we have Congress trying to negotiate a peace treaty, which is the executive job, and we have Congress also trying to decide whether we're going to use air power, whether we're going to use ground troops, and that, of course, should be the commander-in-chief once a proper war is declared.
Although one can argue that it is the duty under the Constitution of Congress to regulate the armed forces, and that within the context of their appropriations authority, they can set bounds on what is to be done and what is not to be done. But I certainly agree that when a group of 435 congressmen or 19 countries try to micromanage a battlefield strategy, it's unlikely that it'll be as effective as might otherwise be the case.
It's a true mess.
In terms of the long-term threat to the liberty and independence of the United States, whether it's putting U.S. military personnel under NATO command or UN command, whether it's the surrender of money and policy authority to the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, what opportunity does Ron have to interact with the Republican leadership and be a voice for restraining them? Because after all, the Republican leaders in Congress have supported NAFTA, the World Trade Organization, both of which are unconstitutional because they infringe on the responsibility of Congress to exercise all legislative powers and the responsibility of Congress to regulate commerce with foreign nations. The Republicans delivered Bill Clinton the $17.9 billion more he wanted for the IMF. The Republican leadership supports the bailout of the phony debt which the UN has assessed on the American taxpayer. On issue after issue, the Republicans are voting like Democrats and are serving as partners, or the Republican leadership at least, providing a partnership role with Bill Clinton. I know that Ron has been on the right side of those issues, but what opportunity does he have to have an impact on Speaker Hastert or Dick Armey or any of the others in the leadership?
Well, I mean, we take whatever opportunities we get, and being one of 435 sometimes isn't enough, and sometimes it's quite enough. The only thing, and I alluded to this earlier, that seems to move members of Congress to do the sorts of things that you're advocating, it seems to be grassroots support. It's to get them where it matters most, and since the principle seems to be to stay in power and get reelected, threatening that seems to be the big thing.
It's good to have a member of Congress like Ron who is more interested in policy than in keeping his job. That is the big problem, that so many members of Congress fear men, they don't fear God, and they don't feel bound by their oath to the Constitution, which too few of them truly understand. And I think one of the reasons that Ron is becoming significantly more influential in this tour of duty than in previous years is that the Republican leadership has to know that he has a significant following around the country. They tried to beat him in the Republican primary, but he had a strong enough following of his own so that he could raise the money to win that primary against the opposition of Gingrich and all the others. And I pray that he continues to grow in strength.
My sense in my short couple of years on the Hill, and believing there's a lot of people with a lot more experience than me, is that I would much rather explain a principled vote than try and explain an unprincipled vote, because then the next time you vote according to some other principle, whatever that is, it becomes more and more, I mean, you paint yourself in a corner, it becomes more and more difficult to explain votes. Ron has gotten a larger percentage of the vote in the last election, and I feel like all that we really did was vote constitutionally and explain to people when they complained or they didn't understand, this is why Ron voted the way he did, and most people given a chance to understand.
In the court, we have 30 seconds. In the course of a month, how many people from your district contact Ron about policy issues?
Hundreds and hundreds, either via mail or the internet, or of course, it's very convenient just to pick up the phone.
Can you give us an estimate of how many of those contacts are supportive and how many are critical?
I'd say most of them are supportive, or can come to support the votes with just a short explanation of, here's what was actually in the legislation, here's the reason we had to vote the way that Ron did.
Please stay with us. We'll be back with Joe Becker of Congressman Ron Paul's office right after these brief messages.
In every major war of the 20th century, control of the Panama Canal has been strategically crucial to America's military. Now the great U.S. Navy is no longer a two-ocean navy, and the Red Chinese military knows very well that control of the isthmus is more important than ever. That's why Red China now seeks control of the two crucial ports on each side of the Panama Canal. If Congress fails to give our military the funds to maintain U.S. bases in Panama, Red China will fill the vacuum, giving a communist superpower a hammerlock grip on the path between the seas. Right now, there's no money in the defense budget to keep our U.S. bases in Panama. And even as we reduce our defense spending, Red China boosts theirs with $40 billion each year coming from us as the result of MFN, Most Favored Nation status. We the people, along with our leaders in Congress and at the White House, have a duty to preserve, protect, and defend America's vital interest.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips with my guest Joe Becker. If you are interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, please check out our website at www.conservativeusa.org. Joe, before we end this show, we need to talk about the usurpation of state and local responsibility in criminal matters by the federal government. I'm glad to see that even the American Bar Association is beginning to speak out regarding the unconstitutional nature of recent federal policy.
Yeah, we're very glad to see that too. In fact, now every time someone contacts us requesting that we co-sponsor a piece of legislation, which is nothing more than a new federal crime probably leading to a bigger federal police force, we send them a copy of an article from Rehnquist, the ABA piece, and then also, of course, Mr. Meese, recent Attorney General, came out in favor of letting states do that. That's probably some of the biggest criticisms we get. You were asking about, what do people in the district think of Ron, and they like him, but sometimes you do have to explain to people that Ron isn't against. Ron isn't in favor of people not paying.
He's not pro-criminal. He's pro-Constitution.
Pro-Constitution, yes.
The tragedy is that so few Americans know their history, know their Constitution, and whoever does not know the past very often loses his claim to the future. Thank you so much for being with us on this broadcast, Joe, and thank you for participating in Conservative Roundtable.